The night settles gently over the Nile. The warm air still carries the memory of the day's heat, even as darkness slowly covers the fields, the villages, and the quiet river. A light breeze moves across the water, barely strong enough to stir the tall reeds along the riverbank. Somewhere in the distance, a small fishing boat drifts toward shore, its wooden hull making soft sounds against the gentle current. Tiny lamps begin to glow inside mud brick homes. Their small flames dance behind open doorways, casting long shadows across worn stone floors. The smell of fresh bread lingers in the evening air, mixing with smoke from cooking fires that are slowly fading into glowing embers. The busy sounds of the day have almost disappeared. The voices from the marketplace have grown quiet. The workshops have emptied. Farmers have returned from the fields. Builders have laid down their tools. Even the donkeys, after carrying heavy loads beneath the bright sun, now stand silently beside simple shelters, resting their tired legs. Night in ancient Egypt arrives slowly. Nothing seems hurried. The river continues its endless journey, just as it has for thousands of years, carrying cool water through a land where every day depends upon its steady flow. As the stars brighten overhead, families gather inside their small homes. Parents speak softly while preparing a simple evening meal. Older children help sweep the dusty floors. Clay jars are checked for enough water to last until morning. Sandals are placed beside sleeping mats, ready for another long day that will begin before sunrise. Tonight, we are not following a king. We are not entering a palace. Instead, we will quietly walk beside the children whose names were never carved into stone. Most of them left no written record behind. Their voices have disappeared into history, carried away by time like footprints washed from the edge of the river. Yet their lives filled every village, every farming settlement, every crowded street beside the Nile. They woke before dawn. They worked while they were still growing. They learned early that every pair of hands mattered. For many children, there was no long season of carefree play. Childhood and responsibility often lived side by side. A small child might carry water. An older brother might help guide animals across dusty paths. A young girl could spend hours grinding grain beside her mother until her arms became tired long before the day was finished. This was simply life. No one believed it unusual. The family depended upon everyone doing what they could. As the first pale light appeared each morning, the village slowly awakened. Roosters called into the cool air. Goats stirred inside small pens. Bread dough, prepared the night before, was placed into warm ovens built from clay. Smoke rose gently toward a sky that would soon become bright with another day of powerful sunshine. Children opened their eyes while the stars were still fading. There was little time to remain beneath woven blankets. The work of the household was already beginning. Some walked barefoot across cool mud floors before slipping into simple sandals. Others hurried outside carrying empty jars toward the nearest well or riverbank. The water they collected would be needed for drinking, cooking, washing, and mixing clay. The jars were heavy. Even when carried carefully, they pressed against small shoulders and growing backs. Along the narrow paths leading to the river, children often walked together. Some spoke quietly. Others remained silent, still waking as they watched the morning mist drift above the Nile. The river itself seemed peaceful. Its surface reflected the soft colors of dawn while birds searched the shallow water for their breakfast. Fishermen prepared woven nets with practiced hands. Their boats rested quietly against the shore until the day's work began. For many children, these peaceful moments beside the water were among the calmest parts of the entire day. Soon the sun would climb higher. The air would grow warmer. Dust would rise beneath every footstep. By midday the heat would cover the land like a heavy blanket. Before that happened, much needed to be done. Inside the home, grain waited to be ground into flour. This work demanded patience more than speed. Two heavy stones rubbed together again and again until the hard kernels slowly became soft powder. It was slow work. Very slow. Children often learned by watching their mothers or older sisters. At first they could only help for a few minutes before becoming tired. But little by little, day after day, their hands grew stronger. There were no lessons explaining that childhood should be free from labor. Life itself became the lesson. Every task repeated until it became familiar. Sweeping. Fetching water. Gathering reeds. Feeding animals. Watching younger brothers and sisters. Repairing baskets. Sorting vegetables. Helping prepare bread. Each chore quietly shaped another ordinary day. The rhythm rarely changed. Seasons came and went. The Nile rose and fell. Harvests arrived. New children were born into the village. Elders passed away. Yet the daily routine continued almost unchanged, connecting one generation to the next with gentle, endless repetition. Many children never questioned this rhythm. It was the only world they knew. When they looked around, every other family lived much the same way. Every home carried similar responsibilities. Every parent worried about food, weather, illness, and the coming harvest. Protection, as we often imagine it today, looked very different. There were loving parents. There was deep care. There was affection shown through shared work, warm meals, quiet stories, and careful teaching. But survival often came before comfort. A child was precious. A child was also needed. The smallest helping hands could make a difficult day just a little easier for the whole family. As morning stretched toward noon, the village filled with familiar sounds. Stone grinding against grain. Wooden wheels turning. Animals calling softly. Potters shaping wet clay. Carpenters tapping wooden pegs into place. Children moved among these sounds almost unnoticed. They carried baskets from one doorway to another. They gathered dry reeds for weaving. Some learned simple trades simply by standing nearby, watching skilled adults repeat the same careful movements every single day. No classroom stood waiting. The workshop became the classroom. The family became the teacher. Experience became the lesson. A mistake might mean wasted grain, broken pottery, or damaged cloth. So children learn through patience, observation, and quiet correction rather than long explanations. Sometimes an older craftsman would place a small tool into a child's hand for the first time. The tool felt heavier than expected. Awkward. Unfamiliar. The first attempt was rarely successful. That did not matter. Tomorrow would bring another chance. And another. And another. In this slow way, childhood gradually blended into adulthood without any clear dividing line. There was no single morning when a child suddenly became grown. Instead, each season added another responsibility, another skill, another expectation. The years passed almost as quietly as the river itself. By afternoon the heat settled across the land. Stone walls held warmth. Dust clung to bare feet. Even the animals searched for patches of shade beneath trees or simple shelters made from reeds. Children working outdoors often paused for only a short rest. A piece of bread. A few dates when available. Cool water if enough remained. Then work continued. The sun showed little mercy. Yet everyone understood its power. People adjusted their pace, moving more slowly, conserving their strength until evening returned with cooler air. As daylight slowly softened, the village changed once again. Workers came home carrying tools across tired shoulders. Fishing boats returned with their catches. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Children who had spent the day helping in fields, workshops, or homes gradually gathered once more with their families. The day's work was ending. Tomorrow's work was already waiting. And beneath the growing darkness, beside the quiet waters of the Nile, another ordinary day disappeared into history almost without leaving a trace. Morning returned so quietly that it almost seemed as though the night had never truly left. Long before the sun climbed above the eastern horizon, a cool gray light rested over the Nile. The river moved without hurry, carrying gentle ripples that reflected the fading stars. Along the banks, tall reeds swayed with the soft breeze, brushing against one another with a faint whisper that blended into the peaceful sounds of waking birds. Inside the small mud brick homes, families slowly stirred from sleep. The floors still felt cool beneath bare feet. Woven sleeping mats were rolled and placed neatly against the walls to make room for another day of work. Clay lamps, their tiny flames nearly gone, gave one final glow before disappearing into the growing daylight. Children opened their eyes just as they had the morning before. There was little need for anyone to call them awake. Their bodies already knew the rhythm of life. Every sunrise carried familiar responsibilities, and each day quietly resembled the one before it. Outside, the village slowly filled with movement. A donkey shifted its weight while waiting for heavy baskets to be loaded. Chickens wandered through the dusty paths searching for scattered grain. Goats stretched their legs before beginning another day of grazing near the edges of the settlement. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the cool air. Women carefully shaped soft dough with practiced hands while children watched the warm ovens, waiting for the loaves to finish baking. The simple scent of grain and smoke welcomed another ordinary morning, one much like countless mornings that had come before. For many children, breakfast was small. A piece of bread. Perhaps a few onions. Sometimes dried fish. Sometimes sweet dates if the season had been kind. Food was never taken for granted. Every harvest depended upon the river, the weather, the strength of working hands, and a little hope that the coming months would remain generous. Even the youngest children slowly learned this lesson. When bread was placed before them, it had already traveled through many hands. Someone had planted the grain. Someone had watered the fields. Someone had harvested the stalks beneath the hot sun. Grain had been carried, cleaned, ground between heavy stones, mixed into dough, and baked over warm fire. Nothing appeared by accident. Everything required patience. As the first light touched the village roofs, older children began leaving home with their parents. Some walked toward the fields where green crops stretched across the rich soil left behind by the Nile's yearly flood. Others followed narrow streets leading toward workshops filled with wood, stone, linen, or clay. Each family carried its own routine. Some families made pottery. Others wove linen cloth. Some worked as fishermen. Others shaped bricks from wet mud and straw. A child usually learned the same work that surrounded the family every single day. Learning happened quietly. There were few formal lessons. Instead, children watched. They listened. They copied. An experienced pair of hands became the greatest teacher. A young boy standing beside his father might spend many weeks simply observing how a fishing net was repaired. At first the knot seemed confusing, almost impossible to remember. But after watching them tied again and again, the movements slowly became familiar. A young girl sitting beside her mother while spinning flax into linen thread experienced the same quiet kind of learning. The work demanded gentle fingers. The fibers needed careful attention. If pulled too hard, they broke. If twisted unevenly, the thread became weak. There was no hurry. Skill arrived slowly, shaped by countless ordinary mornings. Children made mistakes. Everyone expected them to. A basket might be woven too loosely. A clay pot might collapse before drying. Water might spill while being carried home. Mistakes were accepted because they were part of learning. Yet they also reminded children that every task mattered. A broken tool or wasted food could affect the entire household. Without many extra resources, families depended upon careful work. As the morning sun climbed higher, shadows became shorter. The air slowly warmed. Dust clung to sandals. Sweat formed across tired faces long before midday. Children working beside adults experienced the changing weather just as everyone else did. The Egyptian sun could feel endless. Its light reflected brightly from pale stone walls. Heat rose from the earth itself. Sometimes even the breeze carried warmth instead of relief. When work paused for a short rest, children often searched for small patches of shade beneath trees or beside mud brick walls. They sat quietly. Someone passed around a clay jar filled with cool river water. Another shared pieces of bread. Conversation remained soft. Everyone understood there was still much work waiting once the short break ended. Life moved at the pace of necessity. The seasons determined everything. When planting began, every available hand became useful. When harvest arrived, children helped gather grain, carry bundles, or watch over animals grazing nearby. Even tasks that seemed small added strength to the whole family. A younger child might frighten birds away from growing crops by waving simple cloth tied to long sticks. The work required patience more than strength. Hour after hour, they watched the fields beneath the bright sky, listening to insects hum among the plants while distant voices drifted across the farmland. The countryside held its own quiet music. The wind moved through tall grasses. Birds circled above the river. Oxen pulled wooden plows through dark soil. Sandals pressed gently into earth softened by the annual flood. Children grew familiar with every sound. They knew the call of fishermen returning with their catch. They recognized the steady scraping of stone workers shaping blocks. They could hear the distant rhythm of wooden mallets inside busy workshops. Each sound belonged to daily life. Each became part of childhood memory. Illness, however, often arrived without warning. A fever. A cough. A painful cut that refused to heal. The ancient world offered few reliable protections against sickness. Parents cared deeply for their children, using herbs, simple remedies, careful washing, and quiet prayers. Sometimes these helped. Sometimes they did not. A family could only do what knowledge and circumstance allowed. When a child became ill, daily work became even more difficult. Brothers and sisters quietly accepted extra responsibilities. Someone still needed to fetch water. Animals still required feeding. Bread still needed baking. The household continued moving, even while worry settled softly over everyone inside. For children who recovered, life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. The village welcomed them back almost without ceremony. The routines had been waiting patiently all along. Afternoon gradually approached. The brightest hours of sunlight encouraged slower movement. Many workers adjusted their pace, saving energy beneath the heavy heat. Children followed their example. Nobody rushed. There was little reason to. The work would still be there tomorrow. And the day after that. As shadows slowly lengthened once again, the village seemed to breathe more easily. The hottest air began to fade. A gentle breeze returned from the river. Fishing boats appeared on the water, their sails catching the softer evening wind. Children carrying empty baskets home passed neighbors doing the same. Faces looked tired but peaceful. The hardest part of the day had ended. Back inside the homes, evening preparations quietly began. Fresh water was poured into clay jars. Simple meals were prepared over small fires. The comforting smell of baking bread mixed with roasted vegetables and herbs gathered from nearby gardens. Parents and children sat together after another long day. The conversations were simple. They spoke about tomorrow's work. About the river. About the weather. About animals that needed attention before sunrise. No grand speeches filled these evenings. Only ordinary words shared among people who depended upon one another. As darkness slowly settled over the Nile once again, the village grew quiet. The stars returned one by one above the wide Egyptian sky. The day's footsteps disappeared beneath the cooling dust. Inside each humble home, children lay once more upon woven mats, listening to distant frogs along the riverbank, the quiet breathing of sleeping family members, and the soft whisper of the warm desert wind passing gently through the night. The quiet night slowly gave way to another gentle dawn. For a little while, the world rested in soft shades of gray. The stars faded one by one, and the first pale light stretched across the calm waters of the Nile. A cool breeze drifted through the reeds, carrying the faint scent of damp earth left behind by the river. It was one of the few moments in the day when the land felt peaceful before the growing warmth of the sun returned. Inside the villages, children were still asleep on woven reed mats spread across the smooth mud floors of their homes. The houses were simple. Most had only a few rooms, built from sun-dried mud bricks that helped keep the inside cooler during the hottest hours of the day. Thick walls held the night's cool air for a little while longer. Flat roofs waited silently above, where some families had spent warm evenings resting beneath the open sky. As the first birds began to sing, parents quietly woke. A small clay lamp flickered near the doorway before being gently extinguished. Someone added dry reeds to the cooking fire. Thin smoke rose slowly toward the ceiling before finding its way through small openings in the roof. Children soon followed. There was little time for stretching or lingering in bed. The day carried its own quiet expectations. Older sisters helped sweep away the fine dust that had settled during the night. Younger brothers gathered empty baskets and clay jars that would soon be carried outside. Every movement felt familiar, repeated so many times that it became almost effortless. The smell of fresh bread slowly filled the home. Grain, carefully ground the day before, had become soft dough. As it baked inside the warm clay oven, the rich scent spread into the morning air, welcoming another ordinary day beside the Nile. For children, breakfast was never hurried. Families often sat close together on simple mats while sharing pieces of warm bread. Sometimes they dipped it into oil. Sometimes it was eaten alongside onions, beans, figs, or a little dried fish if one had been saved from an earlier catch. Nothing was wasted. Every crumb held value. Food represented many hours of careful work stretching back through the changing seasons. Children understood this without anyone needing to explain it. After the meal, the village slowly came alive. Doors opened. Neighbors greeted one another with quiet smiles. Donkeys patiently waited beside loaded baskets. Goats wandered through narrow pathways searching for fresh plants growing between the homes. The dusty streets soon filled with familiar footsteps. Children walked beside parents toward the day's work. Some followed winding paths that led into green fields where crops stretched toward the morning sunlight. Others entered busy workshops where stone, wood, clay, and linen waited to be shaped by patient hands. For many boys, the workshop became almost like a second home. A father who carved wooden furniture or repaired farming tools often brought his son along from an early age. At first the child simply watched. He noticed how carefully each tool was chosen, how slowly each cut was made, how even a small mistake could waste valuable wood. Little by little, small tasks were offered. Holding a piece of timber steady, sweeping away wood shavings, carrying finished tools to waiting customers. Each simple job became another quiet lesson. Girls often learned in much the same way. Inside the home or nearby workspaces, mothers taught daughters how to grind grain, spin flax into thread, weave linen cloth, prepare meals, and care for younger children. None of these lessons arrived through long speeches. Instead, they were shared through daily life. A child watched, then tried, then watched again. Over many seasons, the movements became smooth and confident. Sometimes children found small moments of play hidden between responsibilities. A smooth stone might become a toy. A handful of reeds could be woven into tiny boats and floated along shallow pools near the riverbank. Simple games appeared almost naturally whenever work briefly paused. Laughter quietly filled the air before fading once more into the sounds of everyday life. These moments were precious because they were brief. Responsibilities always returned. The adults never forgot how much depended upon everyone's effort. As the morning continued, the village grew warmer. The cool breeze disappeared beneath the strengthening sunlight. Shadows became shorter. The bright sky stretched without clouds across the wide Egyptian landscape. Children working outdoors felt the heat settle gently onto their shoulders. Those helping in the fields learned how carefully crops needed to be watched. Young plants required water. Animals had to be kept away from growing grain. Bundles of harvested crops needed carrying before the hottest hours arrived. The work demanded patience more than speed. Everything happened slowly. Even the oxen pulling wooden plows moved with calm determination across the dark soil. The rhythm of farming rarely changed. The river flooded. Seeds were planted. Green shoots appeared. Harvest arrived. Then the cycle quietly began again. Children grew up inside this endless pattern. Their lives followed the same steady rhythm as the river itself. For those living near fishing villages, the Nile became both classroom and companion. Fathers taught children how to untangle fishing nets after each day's work. The rope smelled of wet reeds and river water. Tiny fish scales shimmered in the early sunlight before drying beneath the warm air. Some older children learned how to guide small boats close to shore. The current had to be respected. The river gave life, but it also demanded care. Even simple mistakes could become dangerous. So children listened closely whenever older fishermen offered advice. They remembered every lesson. By midday, the heat became heavy once again. The village slowed almost without anyone speaking. Workers wiped sweat from their faces. Children searched for narrow strips of shade beside walls or beneath date palms. Water jars were passed from hand to hand. Cool drinks from the Nile brought welcome relief after long hours beneath the blazing sun. The afternoon often felt quieter than the morning. The air shimmered above dusty roads. Even birds seemed to sing less. Many children continued helping with lighter tasks until the strongest heat slowly began to fade. Inside homes, younger brothers and sisters sometimes rested while older children continued working nearby. There was always something waiting to be done. Broken baskets needed repair. Flax required sorting. Clay jars needed cleaning. Fresh reeds had to be gathered before sunset. None of these jobs seemed remarkable. Yet together they shaped nearly every hour of childhood. Parents cared deeply for their sons and daughters. Love appeared through steady actions rather than grand displays. A father might quietly lift a heavy basket from a child's tired arms. A mother might save the softest piece of bread for the youngest member of the family. An older sister might finish her own work before helping a smaller brother complete his chores. Protection existed within the limits of the world they knew. Families watched over one another with kindness whenever possible. But life remained demanding. The land expected constant effort. The river required careful attention. Illness, drought, or poor harvests could quickly change everything. Children learned these truths simply by growing up. As evening slowly approached, cooler air returned from the river. The village breathed more easily. Farmers gathered their tools. Craftsmen carefully stored unfinished work for tomorrow. Fishing boats drifted back toward shore, their wooden sides glowing softly beneath the golden light of the setting sun. Children walked home with dusty feet and tired legs. Some carried small bundles of reeds. Others balanced clay jars against their shoulders. Many were quiet after the long day. Their thoughts drifted gently between hunger, rest, and tomorrow's familiar routine. Cooking fires slowly filled the evening air with comforting smells. Fresh bread baked once again. Stews simmered inside clay pots. Neighbors greeted one another while returning home through the narrow streets. As darkness gently settled across the Nile Valley, families gathered inside their homes. The day's work was finished. For now. Children listened as older relatives shared quiet stories remembered from generations before them. Tales of clever farmers, patient fishermen, faithful builders, and ordinary families who had lived beside the great river long ago. Outside, the stars slowly filled the vast Egyptian sky. The warm desert wind brushed softly against the mud brick walls. Somewhere beyond the sleeping village, gentle waves touched the riverbank again and again, just as they had for thousands of years. And as another peaceful night wrapped itself around the ancient world, the children of Egypt closed their eyes, knowing that when the first light returned, the familiar rhythm of life would quietly begin once more. The stars remained above the Nile for a little while longer. They shimmered quietly across the dark sky, reflected in the slow-moving water below. The river carried their light without a sound, flowing as it always had, steady and patient through the sleeping land. Along its banks, clusters of reeds bent gently in the warm night breeze, making a soft rustling that blended with the distant calls of frogs hidden among the marshes. Most of the village was still asleep. Inside the small mud-brick homes, families rested close together. The day's warmth lingered in the thick walls, but the coolness of the night had made the rooms comfortable once again. Woven sleeping mats covered the smooth earthen floors. Clay jars filled with water stood quietly against the walls, waiting for another busy day. For children, these peaceful hours were often the deepest sleep they would know. The coming day would ask much from them. Their small hands would carry baskets. Their feet would follow dusty roads. Their backs would bend beside fields, ovens, workshops, and riverbanks. But for now, everything remained wonderfully still. As the eastern horizon slowly brightened, the village awakened almost without noise. A rooster called somewhere beyond the nearest houses. A donkey stamped gently against the packed earth. The first cooking fires were carefully lit, their thin streams of smoke rising into the calm morning air. One by one, children stirred beneath simple woven blankets. Some rubbed sleepy eyes before sitting quietly on their mats. Others listened for the familiar sounds of parents already beginning the morning's work. There was comfort in these familiar sounds. The scrape of a clay bowl. The crackle of dry reeds feeding the fire. The steady grinding of grain between heavy stones. Each sound had greeted them since they were very young. It meant another ordinary day had begun. Many children started the morning by helping with the household water. Clay jars needed filling before the heat grew too strong. The journey to the river was made so often that every path became familiar. Their sandals pressed gently into the cool dust while the rising sun slowly painted the sky with pale gold. Older brothers often carried the larger jars. Younger sisters balanced smaller ones with careful hands. Sometimes they walked in silence. Sometimes they spoke softly with neighboring children making the same journey. No one hurried. The Nile would still be there when they arrived. The river welcomed everyone. Its quiet waters supplied drinking water, washing water, water for cooking, and water for the fields that stretched beyond the village. Without the Nile, life here could never have flourished. Children understood this long before they fully understood many other things. They respected the river because every adult around them respected it too. Returning home with heavy jars required patience. The clay containers became heavier with every step. Small shoulders grew stronger through repetition rather than exercise. No one counted the weight. No one measured improvement. The work itself quietly shaped growing bodies. Back inside the home, another task often waited. Fresh grain had to be cleaned before it could be ground into flour. Children sat beside older family members, carefully picking away tiny stones, bits of straw, and other pieces carried in from the harvest. It was slow work. Patient work. The kind of work that invited quiet conversation. While hands remained busy, stories gently flowed from one generation to another. A grandmother might remember the great flood from many years before. A grandfather might speak softly about building boats when he was young. Parents shared small lessons hidden inside everyday memories. These stories were not grand adventures. They were simple moments. How to recognize healthy crops. How to care for worn sandals. How to mend a torn fishing net before it became impossible to repair. Children listened closely. The wisdom of everyday life mattered more than distant tales of powerful rulers. Soon the village became brighter. Sunlight reached every rooftop. Shadows shortened across narrow streets. Merchants opened their modest stalls, arranging baskets of onions, figs, garlic, beans, and woven goods with quiet care. Children passing through the marketplace noticed the familiar faces of neighbors. The baker who always rose before dawn. The potter whose hands were never free from traces of clay. The fisherman repairing yesterday's nets. The old woman who sold fresh herbs gathered near the riverbank. Every face belonged to someone they knew. Villages along the Nile often felt like one large family. People watched one another's children. They greeted one another each morning. They shared news of harvests, illnesses, births, and changing seasons. Even so, every household carried its own burdens. Some families owned more land than others. Some enjoyed successful harvests. Others struggled through difficult years when crops failed or illness reduced the number of working hands. Children noticed these differences, though they rarely spoke about them. Sometimes a meal was smaller. Sometimes clothes remained patched for many seasons. Sometimes sandals were handed down from older brothers and sisters after careful repair. Nothing useful was thrown away. Linen garments were mended again and again until little of the original cloth remained. Broken baskets received fresh reeds. Wooden handles were replaced instead of discarded. Children learned that caring for possessions meant making them last as long as possible. As the morning continued, the sounds of labor slowly filled the air. Stone striking stone inside workshops. Wood scraping against wood. The gentle splash of oars dipping into the river. Oxen moving steadily through the fields. Children became part of this quiet orchestra. Some spent hours twisting flax into thread. Others sorted vegetables gathered from nearby gardens. Young boys carried tools across construction sites where older builders shaped mud bricks beneath the warm sun. None of these jobs seemed extraordinary. They were simply part of growing up. No one expected childhood to exist entirely apart from work. Instead, learning responsibility began naturally, little by little. A task suitable for a 6-year-old differed from one given to a 12-year-old. As children grew stronger, expectations slowly grew with them. This change happened so gradually that it was hardly noticed. One season a child carried a small basket. The next season a slightly larger one. Years passed quietly in this way. There were still moments of happiness scattered throughout the day. A bird building its nest beneath a roof. A playful goat escaping its pen before children gently guided it back. Cool water splashed across tired hands after hours of dusty work. The sweet taste of a ripe fig shared between brothers. The laughter of sisters while washing clothes beside the river. These moments rarely lasted long. Yet they gave gentle brightness to ordinary life. As afternoon approached, the sun once again covered the land with heavy warmth. Children instinctively slowed their pace. The hottest hours demanded patience rather than speed. Work continued, but more gently. Some families rested briefly beneath woven shelters. Others gathered inside thick-walled homes where the air remained slightly cooler. The smell of baked bread lingered softly through the village. Clay cups of water passed quietly from hand to hand. No one wasted energy speaking loudly. Even conversation seemed to move more slowly beneath the afternoon heat. When evening finally arrived, relief spread across the settlement. The golden light softened every wall and every dusty road. Long shadows stretched across the fields. Boats returned from the river carrying fishermen who had spent the day beneath the wide Egyptian sky. Children watched them pull woven nets onto the shore. Sometimes the catch was plentiful. Sometimes only a few fish shimmered inside the baskets. Either way, tomorrow would bring another journey onto the water. Life beside the Nile was built upon quiet persistence. The river never hurried. The seasons never hurried. And neither did the people. As darkness slowly settled once again over the ancient land, the village became peaceful. Cooking fires glowed softly behind open doorways. Parents finished the last small chores of the evening. Children washed dusty feet before settling onto woven mats. Outside, the warm desert wind carried the scent of reeds, damp earth, and distant water across the sleeping village. Above them, countless stars quietly watched another ordinary day disappear into history, leaving behind only the gentle rhythm of life beside the timeless Nile. Before the first light reached the rooftops of the village, the Nile was already awake. Its quiet current slipped gently through the valley, touching reeds, riverbanks, and small wooden boats tied carefully to worn posts. A thin mist floated above the water, soft enough to hide the far shore for a little while. Birds stood silently in the shallows, waiting for the morning to grow brighter before searching for fish. The village rested in peaceful silence. Only a few cooking fires had begun to glow. Inside the mud brick homes, children still slept close to their families. Their woven mats lay side by side across the smooth earthen floor. There were no separate bedrooms for most households. Everyone shared the same space, listening through the night to the breathing of parents, brothers, sisters, and grandparents. When the first rooster called, the quiet room slowly came to life. A mother rose first, moving carefully so she would not disturb the youngest child. She reached for a clay lamp, now nearly empty of oil, and placed it aside as dawn slowly brightened the doorway. Soon afterward, the older children opened their eyes. There was no loud command telling them to begin the day. The rhythm of life had already become part of them. Each sunrise brought familiar work, and each morning unfolded in nearly the same gentle order. One child folded the woven blankets. Another gathered empty baskets waiting near the doorway. Someone checked the small clay jars to see how much water remained from the evening before. Outside, the air still felt cool against their skin. For a short time, before the sun climbed higher, the valley seemed almost weightless. The dusty roads had not yet grown hot. The stones beneath their sandals still held the coolness of the night. Children often enjoyed these quiet moments without realizing they were special. They walked beside parents toward the river, hearing only soft footsteps, distant birds, and the gentle splash of water against the shore. The Nile was the heart of every day. Children learned this long before they could fully understand the seasons. The river gave water to drink. It fed the crops. It carried fishermen across its calm surface. It brought reeds for baskets and boats. It offered mud that became bricks for homes. Nearly everything around them began with the river. Standing beside its edge, children watched adults fill large clay jars. The water reflected the growing colors of dawn. Small fish darted beneath the surface. The gentle current never seemed to stop. It had flowed before their grandparents were born, and it would continue long after they themselves became old. That steady movement quietly shaped every generation. The journey home was slower. Water jars were heavy. Even older children had to walk carefully along the uneven paths. Sometimes two brothers shared a single container between them. Sometimes a father silently lifted the heaviest jar from his daughter's tired arms before carrying it the rest of the way. These small acts of kindness rarely drew attention. They simply belonged to family life. Back inside the home, breakfast slowly came together. Fresh bread, baked on the warm clay oven, filled the room with a comforting smell. Simple foods rested in small bowls made from clay. Perhaps there were beans gently cooked over the fire. Perhaps onions gathered from a nearby field. Sometimes there were ripe dates, sweet enough to brighten an ordinary meal. Children ate quietly. Food was never rushed. Every bite represented long hours of work beneath the Egyptian sun. Once breakfast ended, another familiar day unfolded. Some children followed their parents toward fields where green barley and emmer wheat stretched across rich black soil left by the annual flood. Others walked into workshops where stone dust floated through beams of sunlight. Each family had its own way of living. Some made pottery. Some shaped wood into tools. Some wove fine linen from flax. Others caught fish or traded goods along the river. Children slowly became part of these traditions. No formal ceremony marked the beginning of learning. It happened naturally. A child watched. Then helped. Then practiced. Year after year, the knowledge settled gently into memory. A young potter's son first learned how to carry damp clay without dropping it. Later he watched his father shape smooth jars upon a simple wheel. Only after many seasons might he be trusted to shape a small bowl of his own. The same quiet patience appeared in every trade. Nothing valuable could be learned in a single day. A girl helping her mother weave linen first learned how to prepare the flax fibers. She watched careful fingers separate, soften, and spin them into thread. At first the thread often broke. Sometimes it tangled into tight knots. No one became angry. Her mother simply smiled softly, untangled the fibers, and began again. The lesson continued. Patient hands created patient children. In many homes, older brothers and sisters cared for the younger ones. A small child might ride on an older sister's hip while she swept the floor or prepared vegetables. An older brother might lead two younger siblings safely through the village while their parents finished work nearby. Responsibility came early. Not because childhood was unimportant, but because every helping hand strengthened the family. There were few places where children could simply spend the entire day playing. Life asks something from everyone. Even so, moments of joy quietly appeared. A smooth stone skipped across calm water. A tiny bird built a nest beneath the roof of a workshop. A cool breeze arrived unexpectedly during the hottest afternoon. A family shared laughter after a stubborn goat escaped its pen for the third time that week. These small moments remained in children's memories. They were simple, gentle, enough to brighten long days of work. As the sun climbed overhead, the familiar heat returned. The dusty roads shimmered. Mud brick walls absorbed the sunlight. Children helping outdoors wiped sweat from their foreheads as they continued their tasks. Nobody expected perfect comfort. The climate itself became another teacher. People learned to move more slowly, to pause in the shade whenever possible, to drink carefully from precious water jars, to save strength for the long afternoon. Inside workshops, the air often felt cooler than the open fields. Stone walls blocked some of the sunlight. Children working beside skilled craftsmen listened to the steady rhythm of tools striking wood or stone. These sounds became almost musical after many years. Tap. Pause. Scrape. Turn. Repeat. The same careful movements echoed through every season. Outside, merchants slowly welcomed visitors into the marketplace. Children carrying baskets often paused for only a moment to admire colorful fruits, woven mats, pottery, or finely made sandals displayed beneath simple cloth shelters. Most knew these goods were not meant for them. They continued walking with quiet discipline. There was always another task waiting at home. As afternoon softened toward evening, the village slowly relaxed. The strongest heat began to disappear. The shadows grew longer. A welcome breeze drifted once again from the Nile, cooling tired faces. Fishermen returned with woven nets hanging from their boats. Farmers brushed dry soil from their hands. Builders stacked their tools neatly for tomorrow. Children walked home beside their parents. Their feet were dusty. Their shoulders were tired. Yet there was comfort in returning together. The smell of evening meals soon filled the narrow streets. Fresh bread baked once more. Stew simmered gently inside clay pots. Families gathered close together as darkness quietly settled across the valley. After eating, children sometimes climbed onto the flat roofs of their homes. The air there felt cooler than inside. Above them stretched an endless sky filled with stars brighter than almost anywhere else on earth. They listened to the soft murmur of the Nile flowing through the darkness. They heard insects singing among the reeds. Far away, a dog barked once before the village became silent again. Slowly, one by one, tired eyes closed. Tomorrow would look very much like today. The same river would flow. The same bread would bake. The same dusty roads would welcome countless footsteps. And another peaceful day of childhood in ancient Egypt would quietly begin again with the rising sun. The last voices of the evening faded slowly into the warm Egyptian night. Across the village, cooking fires had grown smaller, leaving only soft orange embers that glowed gently outside the homes. The day's work was finally over. The tools had been placed against mud brick walls. Fishing nets hung neatly from wooden poles to dry before morning. Clay jars stood filled with water, ready for another sunrise. The Nile flowed quietly beyond the sleeping houses. Its gentle current never rested. Whether the people were awake or asleep, whether the fields were green or waiting for the next flood, the river continued its endless journey through the valley. Children often fell asleep listening to its distant whisper, a sound so familiar that many hardly noticed it anymore. The desert beyond the fertile land seemed endless beneath the moonlight. The wide sands remained silent. Only a soft breeze crossed them, carrying a little warmth into the village before slipping between the narrow streets. Inside one small home, a young boy turned over on his woven mat. Beside him, his younger sister was already asleep, holding a small bundle of cloth that had become her favorite comfort. Nearby, their parents rested after another long day beneath the sun. An elderly grandmother slept quietly against the far wall, her breathing slow and steady. The room was simple. There were no decorated beds. No soft pillows. No heavy furniture. Only the few possessions the family truly needed. A wooden stool. Several woven baskets. Clay bowls stacked neatly together. A grinding stone worn smooth after many years of use. Life was built around usefulness rather than luxury. Children learned this from the very beginning. Every object inside the home had earned its place through daily work. Nothing remained simply for decoration. Before dawn arrived, the village rested in complete stillness. Then, almost unnoticed, another day began. The eastern sky slowly brightened. The stars quietly disappeared. Birds hidden among the reeds greeted the morning before the people did. Children woke to familiar sounds once again. The gentle crackle of fresh firewood. The slow turning of the grinding stone. The soft voices of parents preparing the morning meal. Even before opening their eyes, they already knew what the day would bring. There would be water to carry. Animals to feed. Floors to sweep. Fields to visit. Tools to clean. Younger brothers and sisters to watch. Their childhood followed the rhythm of responsibility. It was not a life without affection. Far from it. Parents loved their children deeply. But love was often shown through care, guidance, shared work, and quiet sacrifice instead of spoken words. A father might rise before everyone else so his family could eat. A mother might quietly give the larger piece of bread to a growing child while keeping less for herself. Children noticed these things. Perhaps they did not fully understand them at first. But as they grew older, they remembered. The morning meal disappeared quickly. The work ahead could not wait. Outside, the village slowly filled with movement. Smoke curled upward into the clear sky. Neighbors greeted one another with calm smiles. Donkeys patiently accepted heavy baskets across their backs. Children walked together toward the river carrying empty clay jars. The path had become so familiar that they hardly needed to think about where they placed their feet. Dust rose softly beneath their sandals. The cool morning air felt pleasant against their faces. For a little while, before the heat returned, everything seemed peaceful. At the riverbank, older children helped younger ones balance the jars. The water shimmered with the golden light of sunrise. A fisherman untied his small wooden boat. Nearby, another carefully repaired a torn net while humming quietly to himself. The children watched him for a moment. Many had seen this same work hundreds of times. Even so, they continued watching. Every careful knot mattered. One day, some of them would tie those same knots with hands of their own. Learning happened through patient observation. There were few written lessons for ordinary children. Knowledge passed from parent to child almost like the river passing through the valley. Slowly. Naturally. Without interruption. A builder's child learned how to shape mud bricks. A farmer's child learned when the soil held enough moisture for planting. A merchant's child learned how to measure grain honestly. A fisherman's child learned how to read the quiet moods of the Nile. These lessons filled ordinary days. No one announced them as education. They were simply life itself. As the sun climbed higher, the village became busier. Potters turned their wheels. Carpenters shaped wooden beams. Weavers worked patiently with flax threads stretched across simple looms. Children moved quietly between them, carrying small tools or gathering materials. Even the smallest task helped the household. A basket delivered on time. Fresh reeds collected before noon. Clay prepared while still moist. Everything saved time for someone else. That was enough. Sometimes children visited the marketplace with older relatives. The market was never silent. Voices remained gentle, but many sounds blended together. Merchants arranged vegetables into neat piles. Fresh bread rested upon woven trays. Clay jars stood in careful rows. Bundles of linen hung from wooden frames where they caught the morning breeze. Children looked with quiet curiosity. The colors. The smells. The movement. Every visit offered something new to notice. A craftsman carving tiny wooden figures. A woman selecting fresh onions. A traveler arriving by boat with unfamiliar goods from another village. The marketplace connected many lives together. Yet it also reminded children that every family worked hard simply to earn enough for daily needs. As afternoon approached, the bright sun covered everything with heavy warmth. The air seemed almost still. Children working outdoors slowed their movements naturally. Adults did the same. No one fought against the heat. Instead, they accepted it as another part of living beside the Nile. Shade became precious. The shadow of a date palm. The cool side of a mud brick wall. The shelter beneath a woven reed roof. Even a few quiet moments away from the sunlight helped tired bodies recover. Water was shared carefully. No one drank carelessly. Every clay jar represented another journey to the river. Every drop carried value. As the day gently moved toward evening, the light softened across the fields. The harsh brightness faded into warm gold. Birds returned toward the riverbanks. The breeze slowly came back, carrying welcome relief through the village. Children walking home often felt both tired and peaceful. Their work had filled the day. Their hands carried traces of dust, clay, grain, or river water. Their sandals were worn from many familiar paths. But home waited just ahead. Soon the smell of fresh bread reached them once again. Families gathered inside their simple homes. The evening meal was never extravagant. Yet sharing it together brought comfort after long hours of labor. Parents asked about the day's work. Older children helped the younger ones wash before sleep. Grandparents quietly told stories remembered from their own childhoods beside the same ancient river. Outside, darkness slowly returned. The stars appeared one by one above the quiet valley. The Nile reflected their gentle light exactly as it had for countless generations. Inside the little homes, children settled onto their woven mats once more. Their eyes grew heavy. The warm desert wind whispered softly through the village. The distant sound of flowing water blended with the peaceful breathing of sleeping families. and without anyone noticing the exact moment, another ordinary day slipped quietly into history, leaving only the calm promise that the sun would rise again over the timeless waters of the Nile. Long before the first glow of sunrise touched the eastern sky, the Nile continued its quiet journey through the valley. The river never seemed to sleep. Even during the deepest hours of the night, its gentle current slipped past reeds and riverbanks, carrying cool water toward villages that depended upon it every single day. The stars reflected across its calm surface like tiny lamps floating in the darkness, while a soft breeze wandered through the marshes with the scent of wet earth and growing plants. The village rested peacefully beneath the fading moon. Inside the small mud brick homes, the air was calm and still. Thick walls protected the families from the heat that would soon return with the rising sun. Children slept close to their parents and brothers and sisters, wrapped in simple linen cloths upon woven reed mats that had been carefully rolled out before nightfall. There was comfort in sleeping together. The gentle breathing of family members filled the quiet room. A child who woke for a moment during the night could hear the familiar sounds of home and quickly drift back to sleep. Outside, an occasional donkey shifted its weight. Somewhere beyond the nearest houses, a dog barked only once before silence settled over the village again. When morning finally arrived, it did so without hurry. The darkness slowly softened into shades of blue and pale gold. One by one, the stars disappeared. The first birds began their songs among the date palms. Smoke from the earliest cooking fires rose gently into the cool morning air. Inside the homes, parents quietly prepared for another ordinary day. Children were soon awake as well. No one needed to remind them of what was waiting. The routines had become part of life itself. A young boy folded the blanket he had shared with his younger brother. His older sister swept the fine layer of dust that had gathered on the floor during the night. Their mother checked the clay jars beside the wall, gently lifting each one to judge how much water remained. There would need to be another trip to the river. There always was. The children stepped outside into the fresh morning air. For a short time, before the day's heat arrived, the village felt peaceful and almost cool. The dusty road leading toward the Nile carried the familiar footprints of neighbors making the same journey. Some balanced empty jars on their shoulders. Others carried woven baskets or simple wooden tools for the work ahead. As they walked, the children noticed the small things that often escape busy adults. A bird gathering tiny pieces of straw for its nest. A lizard resting on a warm stone. Fresh tracks left in the dust by a wandering goat before sunrise. The world seemed full of quiet details. The Nile welcomed them once again. Its surface reflected the brightening sky while fishermen untied their boats from wooden posts along the shore. Some older boys paused to watch the men prepare their nets. The ropes looked worn from years of careful use. Small knots had been repaired so many times that each net carried the story of countless fishing trips. One fisherman noticed the children watching. Without saying very much, he showed them how a torn section could be mended. His fingers moved slowly. Each knot was tied with care. There was no wasted motion. The children watched closely. No one hurried the lesson. Knowledge passed from one generation to another in moments exactly like these. Not through books. Not through formal classrooms. But through patient hands working beside younger hands. Nearby, girls filled clay jars with fresh water. The jars became surprisingly heavy once they were full. Two sisters lifted one together, smiling quietly as they balanced its weight between them. They had done this many times before. Their steps were careful. The path home was uneven. A single stumble could crack the clay or spill precious water. By the time they returned to the village, the sun had climbed above the horizon. Its warmth slowly spread across the rooftops. The smell of baking bread drifted from nearly every home. Breakfast was simple but welcome. Fresh loaves rested beside bowls of beans. Some families shared onions or cucumbers gathered from nearby gardens. Others enjoyed sweet dates that had been carefully stored from the previous harvest. Children ate without wasting a single bite. Food represented many hours of labor. Every grain had been planted, watered, harvested, carried, ground, and baked by someone's hands. That understanding became part of everyday life. Soon the day's work began in earnest. For many children, the morning was spent helping wherever help was needed most. Some accompanied their fathers into the fields. Others remained at home beside their mothers. Every family depended upon cooperation. A farmer's son learned how to guide oxen slowly across the fields without frightening them. He watched how his father studied the soil, feeling its moisture with experienced hands before deciding where to plant. These quiet lessons could not be rushed. The land rewarded patience. Nearby, daughters helped prepare flax for weaving. Bundles of pale fibers rested beside them as they carefully separated each strand. Their mothers explained little. Instead, they demonstrated every movement. Children copied what they saw. Some attempts were uneven. Others were successful. With every passing season, steady practice slowly became skill. By late morning, the village echoed with familiar sounds. Stone wheels turning. Wooden mallets striking beams. Potters shaping clay upon spinning wheels. Donkeys pulling small carts through narrow streets. Children recognized each sound without needing to look. The noises belonged to home. Even the smell of fresh clay drying beneath the sun became part of childhood memory. Around midday, the heat settled heavily across the valley. The bright sky seemed almost endless. The air shimmered above the dusty paths. People naturally slowed their pace. Children helping in the fields paused beneath the shade of date palms. Others rested inside workshops where thick walls offered a little relief from the sun. A mother poured cool water into small clay cups. Each child drank slowly. No one wasted water. Its value was understood by everyone. During these quiet breaks, children sometimes spoke with one another. They shared small observations about the day. A bird they had seen. A boat that had arrived from another village. A calf born during the previous evening. The conversations remained gentle. Soon enough, work quietly resumed. Afternoon tasks were often lighter than those of the early morning. A young boy gathered dry reeds for repairing baskets. Two sisters carefully folded freshly woven linen before storing it inside wooden chests. Another child collected firewood from places where shrubs still grew along the edge of the cultivated land. None of these jobs seemed remarkable. Yet together they kept the household running smoothly. Parents noticed every small effort. Praise was usually quiet. A simple smile. A gentle nod. A hand resting briefly upon a child's shoulder. Affection often appeared through these small moments rather than through many words. As evening approached, the village slowly relaxed. The golden sunlight stretched across the fields, turning the river into a ribbon of shining bronze. Fishing boats returned one after another. Farmers carried their tools home across tired shoulders. The smell of evening meals drifted through the streets. Children finished their final chores before washing the dust from their hands and feet. Families gathered together once more. They shared bread that was still warm from the oven. They listened to the soft voices of grandparents recalling ordinary memories from years long past. Outside, the warm desert wind moved gently through the reeds beside the Nile. The stars slowly appeared overhead. One by one. Just as they always had. The village grew quiet again. Children settled onto their woven mats. Their tired eyes slowly closed. The sounds of the day faded into peaceful silence. Only the river continued its endless journey through the ancient land, carrying another ordinary day gently into history. The Nile moved through the darkness as though it had all the time in the world. Its quiet waters slipped around gentle bends, past clusters of papyrus reeds, and beside villages that had rested along its banks for countless generations. The river carried no hurry. It asked for no attention. Yet every home, every field, every workshop, and every family depended upon its steady flow. Above the valley, the night sky stretched from one horizon to the other. Thousands of stars filled the darkness with soft light. Without the bright lamps of a later age, the heavens appeared remarkably clear. Children who happened to wake for a moment during the night could look through an open doorway or from the flat roof of their home and see a sky so full of stars that it almost seemed endless. Soon, the eastern horizon began to change. The blackness softened into deep blue. Then came pale gray. Then a gentle wash of gold spread slowly across the land. Morning arrived without sound. The village seemed to wake one careful breath at a time. A woman opened her wooden door. A donkey shook its head, making the small bell around its neck ring softly. A rooster announced the new day. The smell of smoke drifted upward as cooking fires were lit one by one. Children stirred on their woven mats. The youngest often stayed asleep for a few moments longer, curling beneath light linen coverings while older brothers and sisters quietly rose to begin the day's work. No one expected childhood to be free from responsibility. From an early age, every child discovered that even the smallest task could help the entire household. A little girl carefully gathered loose pieces of firewood left beside the oven. Her older brother carried yesterday's empty water jars toward the doorway. Neither task was difficult on its own. But together they prepared the family for another busy day. Outside, the morning air remained pleasantly cool. It was perhaps the most comfortable part of the entire day. The dusty road, the morning air remained pleasantly cool. It was perhaps the most comfortable part of the entire day. The dusty road leading toward the river felt smooth beneath worn sandals. Children walked beside parents without speaking very much. The quiet itself felt comforting. Everyone knew the routine. There was no need to rush. The Nile waited patiently, just as it always had. Along the riverbank, life slowly unfolded. Fishermen untied ropes securing their boats. Some examined woven nets for tiny tiers that needed repairing before setting out upon the water. Others quietly loaded baskets, clay jars, and wooden paddles into their boats. Children often stopped for a moment to watch these preparations. The fishermen rarely wasted movement. Every knot was tied with care. Every tool rested exactly where it was needed. Years of repetition had made their work appear almost effortless. A young boy looked closely at the hands of his father. The skin was rough. Small scars crossed his fingers. His palms showed years of pulling heavy nets from the river. The child reached down and touched his own hands for a moment. They were still soft. Still growing. One day they would likely look much the same. Back in the village, breakfast was nearly ready. Warm bread emerged from clay ovens. Steam rose gently into the cool morning air. The smell drifted through narrow streets, reaching neighbors before the loaves even left the fire. Children eagerly waited for the bread to cool enough to hold. Simple meals filled the beginning of the day. Bread, beans, onions, fresh herbs, Perhaps a few ripe figs gathered from nearby trees. Sometimes there was honey, though only in small amounts. Nothing extravagant. Yet after the quiet work of the early morning, the food brought welcome comfort. Once breakfast had ended, each family followed its familiar path. Farmers walked toward fields where rich black soil still held moisture from the Nile's yearly flooding. Craftsmen opened the doors of workshops already carrying the scent of wood, stone, clay, or woven flax. Merchants arranged baskets of vegetables beneath woven shades to protect them from the coming heat. Children followed wherever they were needed. There were no clocks. No bells marking the hours. The rising sun quietly guided every part of the day. A young girl accompanied her mother to the weaving room. Bundles of flax rested neatly against one wall. The fibers had already been soaked, dried, and prepared. Now they would become thread. The work demanded patience. Her mother showed her how to hold the fibers gently between her fingers. Not too tightly. Not too loosely. The thread must remain even. The child tried. The fibers slipped apart. She smiled quietly. Her mother smiled as well. Without saying very much, she simply demonstrated the movement again. The lesson continued. There was no frustration. Only practice. Across the village, another child worked beside his grandfather in a small pottery workshop. The old man's wheel turned slowly beneath steady hands. A lump of wet clay rested in the center. With gentle pressure, it rose into the shape of a simple bowl. The boy watched with complete attention. It looked almost magical. When invited to try, his own bowl leaned awkwardly to one side before collapsing. The grandfather laughed softly. Not in mockery, but with kindness. He placed another piece of clay upon the wheel. Again, he said gently. So the child began once more. This was how knowledge survived. Patient hands teaching patient hands. As the morning passed, the marketplace gradually filled with life. Donkeys carried baskets overflowing with vegetables. Women selected grain for the evening meal. Merchants displayed woven mats, clay lamps, sandals, and simple wooden tools. Children weaving through the crowd noticed familiar faces everywhere. Nearly everyone belonged to the same wide community. The baker greeted the potter. The fisherman greeted the farmer. The scribe greeted the carpenter. Although each family had different work, their lives remained closely connected. When one family celebrated a birth, neighbors often helped. When illness arrived, others quietly shared what they could. Children grew up surrounded by this gentle sense of community. It offered comfort, even when life itself remained demanding. By midday, the Egyptian sun ruled the valley once again. Heat settled across rooftops. Dust shimmered above the roads. The air became almost still. Children helping outdoors slowed their movements naturally. Everyone understood that strength must be used carefully beneath such powerful sunlight. Shade became precious. A mud brick wall offered relief. The branches of a date palm created cool patterns upon the ground. Inside workshops, thick walls kept the rooms pleasantly dim compared to the bright world outside. Parents reminded children to drink water often. The cool clay jars rested in shaded corners of the house. Each sip brought welcome relief. Water carried the taste of the river itself. Fresh. Clean. Essential. As afternoon slowly drifted toward evening, the village seemed to breathe once again. The harsh sunlight softened into warm gold. Long shadows stretched across the fields. Birds returned to the reeds beside the Nile. Children gathered bundles of finished work before walking home. Some carried freshly baked bread. Others balanced small baskets of vegetables. A few led tired goats through the quiet streets. The smell of evening meals welcomed every family home. Inside the houses, conversation remained calm and gentle. Parents spoke quietly about tomorrow's work. Grandparents shared memories of earlier floods along the Nile. Children listened while enjoying the comfort of familiar voices. Outside, the first stars appeared above the valley. The warm desert wind slipped softly through open doorways. The river continued its endless journey beneath the moonlight. One by one, tired children closed their eyes. Their hands still remembered the work of the day. Their feet still carried traces of dust from the village paths. And as sleep slowly settled over the ancient world, another peaceful day disappeared into history, carried gently onward by the timeless waters of the Nile. The ancient land rested beneath another quiet night. The Nile flowed through the darkness with the same calm rhythm it had followed for thousands of years. Moonlight shimmered across its gentle surface, turning the slow-moving water into a ribbon of silver that wound through the valley. Along the riverbanks, tall papyrus reeds swayed softly whenever the warm desert breeze wandered past them. The villages slept peacefully. Only the faint glow of dying cooking fires remained outside a few homes. Their embers faded little by little, leaving behind the comforting smell of smoke mixed with baked bread and damp earth. Inside one modest mud brick house, an entire family slept together. The room was not large, yet it held everything they truly needed. Clay jars rested against the wall. Woven baskets waited beside the doorway. A wooden chest held carefully folded linen clothing. Grinding stones sat quietly in one corner, ready to begin their work again when morning arrived. The youngest child shifted gently beneath a light linen covering. His older sister was already deeply asleep beside him, tired from spending much of the day helping their mother prepare grain and carry water. The quiet breathing of the family filled the room. Outside, the world remained wonderfully still. Far away, a night bird called only once before silence returned. The stars slowly crossed the sky. Hours passed almost unnoticed. Then, little by little, dawn approached once again. The first hint of light appeared beyond the eastern horizon. Dark blue became pale gray. Gray slowly turned to soft gold. Morning arrived so gently that it seemed to whisper rather than speak. The village awakened one family at a time. A wooden door opened. A donkey stretched after the night's rest. Birds greeted the sunrise from the branches of date palms growing near the river. Soon the familiar sounds of daily life returned. The crackle of cooking fires. The scrape of stone against grain. The quiet voices of neighbors greeting one another as they stepped outside. Children opened their eyes. They knew this rhythm well. There was comfort in its predictability. Although each day brought hard work, it also brought familiar faces, familiar paths, and familiar tasks. Nothing felt uncertain. Their lives followed the steady rhythm of the Nile itself. One young girl carefully rolled up the woven sleeping mats while her younger brother folded the light linen coverings. Their mother smiled quietly. There was no need to remind them. After years of repeating these simple tasks, they had become part of every morning. Soon the smell of fresh bread drifted through the room. The clay oven had already begun warming before sunrise. Simple loaves slowly baked while small bowls of beans and onions were prepared nearby. Breakfast was never extravagant, but it filled hungry stomachs before another long day began. As they ate together, sunlight slowly entered through the doorway. Dust floating in the morning air sparkled for just a moment before disappearing into the growing brightness. Outside, neighbors were already beginning their own routines. A fisherman carried his rolled net across one shoulder. A potter opened the door of his workshop. A farmer adjusted the harness on a patient ox waiting quietly beside a wooden plow. Children watched these familiar scenes every morning. Many already knew which path their own lives would likely follow. A potter's child often became a potter. A farmer's child learned the fields. A fisherman taught the river to the next generation. Knowledge moved through families like a quiet stream. No one hurried it. Learning began simply by watching. A little boy followed his father toward the fields. The soil beneath their sandals felt soft where the Nile's flood had once covered the land. Green shoots stretched across the rich earth, promising another harvest if the weather remained kind. His father stopped beside one row of young plants. Without speaking, he knelt and gently touched the soil. The boy watched carefully. Then he knelt beside him and did the same. The earth felt cool beneath his fingertips. It was a simple lesson. Yet it taught more than words could explain. Nearby, another child remained in the village with her grandmother. The older woman was repairing a woven basket that had served the family for many years. Several reeds had broken. Instead of throwing the basket away, she patiently replaced each damaged strand. The little girl sat quietly beside her. After watching for several minutes, she picked up a reed herself. Her first attempt slipped loose. The second looked uneven. By the third, her hands were already learning the rhythm. Her grandmother smiled without saying very much. Patience was one of the greatest gifts older generations could offer. The sun continued climbing. Warm light spread across every rooftop. Children moved through the village carrying small baskets, bundles of flax, clay bowls, or fresh vegetables gathered from nearby gardens. Each child contributed something. No task was too small. A younger brother carried only a handful of onions. An older sister balanced a heavy water jar against her shoulder. Both were helping. Both belonged to the quiet rhythm of family life. By late morning, the marketplace had become lively. Merchants arranged fresh dates beneath woven shades. Potters displayed rows of newly fired jars. Carpenters leaned carefully carved stools against the walls of their shops. Children sometimes paused while walking through the market. Not because they were shopping, but because there was always something interesting to observe. A traveler arriving by boat. A merchant speaking with visitors from another village. A donkey refusing to move until offered fresh water. These small moments quietly colored everyday life. The heat slowly gathered strength. By midday, even the stones beneath their sandals had become warm. The bright Egyptian sun filled the valley with shimmering light. Children helping outdoors wiped sweat from their faces with the edges of their linen garments. Adults slowed their pace. No one tried to hurry beneath such powerful heat. Instead, work continued steadily. Patiently. The fields could not be rushed. Neither could the river. Nor the changing seasons. Everything moved according to its own quiet time. During the hottest part of the afternoon, many families rested briefly in the shade. Mud brick walls kept the inside of the home noticeably cooler than the open fields. Children drank cool water stored inside clay jars. The water tasted fresh after resting in the shaded room. Some younger children closed their eyes for a short nap. Older ones used the quieter hours to mend baskets, sort grain, or prepare tools for tomorrow. As evening slowly approached, the air began to change. A welcome breeze drifted from the Nile. The smell of damp reeds returned. Birds flew low above the river as fishermen guided their boats toward shore. Children waiting near the riverbank eagerly watched the familiar boats return. Sometimes the baskets held many fish. Sometimes only a few. Either way, tomorrow would bring another journey onto the water. That was simply life. Back in the village, cooking fires were lit once again. Fresh bread baked inside warm clay ovens. The comforting smell spread from one home to the next until the whole village seemed wrapped in its gentle warmth. Families gathered together. Children spoke softly about the small events of the day. Parents listened while preparing the evening meal. Grandparents smiled as familiar stories found new ears. Above them, the sky slowly darkened. The first stars quietly appeared. The sounds of the village faded one by one. A door closed. Footsteps disappeared. The last fishing boat was tied securely along the riverbank. Inside every humble home, tired children settled once more onto woven mats. The warmth of the day slowly slipped away. The peaceful sound of the Nile drifted through the night air. And beneath a sky filled with countless stars, another ordinary day of childhood in ancient Egypt gently came to rest, ready to begin again with the next soft sunrise. Another peaceful night settled across the valley of the Nile. The air was warm, but no longer heavy with the heat of the afternoon. A gentle breeze wandered across the river, brushing through tall stands of papyrus before slipping quietly between the mud brick homes of the sleeping village. The sound of flowing water mixed with the soft chorus of crickets hidden among the reeds, creating the familiar music that had lulled generations of children to sleep. The moon hung low above the river. Its pale light rested gently upon fishing boats tied along the shore. Their ropes creaked softly as the current nudged them again and again. Nearby, woven nets dried beneath the open sky, carrying the faint scent of fresh water and river plants. Inside one modest home, the youngest child stirred for a moment. He listened without fully waking. He heard the steady breathing of his family. He heard the wind outside. He heard the distant splash of something moving in the river. The sounds were so familiar that they quickly carried him back into sleep. For children in ancient Egypt, the night was often one of the few times when nothing was expected of them. No baskets needed carrying. No grain needed grinding. No animals needed watching. The quiet hours belonged to rest. Their growing bodies recovered from long days spent beneath the bright Egyptian sun. As darkness slowly faded, the eastern horizon welcomed another sunrise. The stars disappeared one after another. A pale ribbon of light spread across the wide sky. The Nile reflected the changing colors with quiet grace, turning from silver into soft shades of blue and gold. Morning had returned. The village awakened little by little. A woman stepped outside carrying a bundle of dry reeds for the cooking fire. A farmer greeted his neighbor with a calm nod before leading his ox toward the fields. A fisherman untied the rope securing his small wooden boat, preparing to drift out upon the still water before the day's heat arrived. Children soon followed. They emerged from their homes rubbing sleepy eyes, stretching tired arms, and stepping carefully onto the cool earth outside. The morning air felt fresh against their faces. For a brief while, the entire valley seemed gentle and calm. Many children began the day by helping prepare the household before leaving for other work. One young girl carefully swept the smooth floor using a simple broom made from bundled reeds. She worked slowly, pushing away the fine dust that had settled during the night. Nearby, her older brother arranged clay bowls beside the cooking area while their mother divided warm bread into equal pieces for breakfast. There was comfort in these small routines. They rarely changed. Every morning unfolded almost like the one before. The smell of baking bread drifted from nearly every home. Smoke rose in thin gray lines above the village. The quiet sounds of daily life slowly replaced the silence of night. Breakfast was simple. Warm bread. Beans cooked gently over the fire. A few dates saved from the previous harvest. Fresh water drawn from the Nile before sunrise. No one hurried through the meal. The work ahead would require strength, and every bite mattered. After eating, families slowly separated to begin their daily routines. Children followed their parents along familiar paths worn smooth by countless footsteps. Some walked toward the fertile fields where barley and emmer wheat sway gently in the morning breeze. Others entered workshops where skilled hands shaped wood, clay, stone, or linen into useful objects. There were no grand announcements marking the beginning of work. The village simply came alive. One boy spent the morning beside his uncle, who carved wooden handles for farming tools. The workshop smelled of fresh-cut acacia wood. Sunlight entered through the doorway in narrow beams, catching tiny pieces of sawdust drifting through the air. The boy watched every careful movement. His uncle measured each piece by eye before making slow, steady cuts with a bronze blade. Nothing was rushed. Every tool needed to last many years. Good work required patience. When the boy was finally handed a small piece of wood to shape himself, his hands felt uncertain. The edges became uneven. The surface remained rough. His uncle smiled kindly and placed another piece before him. Again, he said softly. There was no anger. Only practice. Across the village, another child sat beside her grandmother beneath the shade of a date palm. Together they sorted flax fibers that would later become linen thread. The work demanded gentle fingers. The fibers tangled easily if handled carelessly. The grandmother spoke quietly while they worked. She told stories of floods she remembered from long ago. She described harvest seasons that had filled every storage jar. She remembered difficult years as well, when families carefully shared what little they had. The young girl listened closely. The stories were as important as the work itself. They carried lessons that could not be written on stone. As the sun climbed higher, the village grew warmer. Children helping in the fields watched carefully for birds that might eat newly planted grain. Some clapped their hands to frighten them away. Others walked slowly between rows of crops, making certain that no wandering goats had slipped through the fences. These tasks seemed small. Yet they protected the family's future harvest. Every careful watch mattered. By late morning, the marketplace had become busy. Merchants greeted familiar customers. Potters arranged rows of newly fired jars outside their workshops. Weavers displayed folded linen cloth across wooden frames. Children passing through the market noticed everything. The bright colors of fresh vegetables. The smell of herbs drying in the sun. The gentle conversations between neighbors who had known one another for many years. Life moved at an unhurried pace. Even in the busiest places, there was little shouting. People spoke calmly. Business was conducted with patience. Everyone understood that tomorrow would bring another market day. As midday approached, the heat settled across the valley once again. The bright sunlight reflected from pale stone walls. Dust shimmered above the roads. Children helping outdoors wiped sweat from their brows before moving into patches of shade whenever possible. The thick walls of mud brick homes offered welcome relief. Inside, the air remained cooler than outside. Clay jars filled with river water stood in shaded corners. The water tasted wonderfully cool after long hours beneath the sun. Afternoons often passed quietly. Children repaired baskets with fresh reeds. They folded dried linen. They cleaned simple tools before storing them carefully. Some helped prepare vegetables for the evening meal. Others looked after younger brothers and sisters while their parents finished the day's work. Responsibility grew slowly. One small task at a time. A child who once carried only a single loaf of bread eventually learned to carry full baskets of grain. A little girl who first watched her mother bake soon learned to knead dough herself. Growth happened quietly, almost without anyone noticing. As evening approached, long shadows stretched across the fields. The breeze returned from the Nile carrying the pleasant scent of damp earth. Fishermen guided their boats toward shore. Farmers brushed dust from their clothing before beginning the walk home. Children gathered the last of their tools and followed behind. The village gradually became peaceful once more. Cooking fires glowed softly. Fresh bread baked inside warm clay ovens. Families gathered together beneath the gentle light of the setting sun. Conversation remained calm. Simple. Comforting. When darkness finally returned, children lay once again upon their woven mats. Outside, the Nile continued its endless journey through the ancient land. Its quiet waters reflected the first stars of another beautiful night. The warm desert breeze drifted gently through the village, and with tired bodies and peaceful hearts, another ordinary day slowly faded into the timeless rhythm of ancient Egypt. Before the first rays of sunlight reached the valley, the world beside the Nile rested in gentle silence. The river flowed through the darkness with its familiar patience, never stopping, never rushing. Moonlight shimmered across the quiet water, and small ripples carried silver reflections toward the distant marshes. Along the banks, papyrus reeds swayed softly in the warm breeze, making a sound so gentle that it blended with the whisper of insects hidden among the leaves. The village remained asleep. Mud brick walls, still cool from the night, surrounded families resting together beneath simple linen coverings. Clay jars stood quietly beside the doorways. Woven baskets waited where they had been placed the evening before. Wooden stools, grinding stones, and simple tools rested peacefully until another day's work would begin. For the children, these quiet hours were precious. Their hands had carried water. Their feet had walked dusty roads. Their shoulders had balanced baskets. Now, for a little while, they could simply sleep. Outside, the eastern sky slowly began to brighten. The stars faded one by one. A faint golden line appeared along the horizon. Morning returned as gently as a slow breath. Soon, the familiar sounds of the village awakened the children. A rooster called across the rooftops. A donkey shook its ears and stamped softly upon the earth. Cooking fires crackled as dry reeds caught the first flames of the day. One young boy opened his eyes and listened for a moment before sitting up. He already knew the order of the morning. Nothing had changed. His older sister rolled the sleeping mats. His mother prepared the oven. His father stepped outside to examine the sky, quietly judging the weather before leaving for the fields. The boy smiled softly. There was comfort in knowing exactly how the day would begin. Breakfast was already filling the room with familiar smells. Fresh bread warmed beside the fire. Beans simmered gently inside a clay pot. A few onions rested in a woven basket nearby. The family gathered together without hurry. No one spoke loudly. The morning itself seemed to encourage quiet voices. As they ate, sunlight slowly entered through the doorway, painting soft golden patterns across the smooth earthen floor. Soon it was time to leave. The children stepped outside into the cool morning air. The village was waking all around them. Neighbors greeted one another with gentle smiles. Women carried empty water jars toward the river. Farmers guided patient oxen along familiar paths. Merchants opened the wooden shutters of their small shops, arranging baskets of vegetables, pottery, and linen for another day of trading. The dusty road toward the Nile already held many footprints. Children walked together in small groups. Some carried baskets. Others balanced jars against their hips. The youngest held the hands of older brothers or sisters, careful not to stumble along the uneven path. When they reached the river, the water reflected the growing light of the new day. The Nile looked peaceful. Small fish broke the surface for only a moment before disappearing beneath the gentle current. Birds stood patiently in the shallows, waiting for breakfast to drift within reach. The children paused for a moment before beginning their work. One by one, they lowered their clay jars into the cool water. They lifted them carefully. The weight was familiar. Heavy enough to demand attention, but no longer surprising after so many mornings. The journey back to the village was slower. A full jar could not be carried carelessly. The children walked with steady steps, careful not to waste a single drop. Along the way, they noticed the quiet beauty surrounding them. Morning sunlight shining across green fields. Palm trees swaying gently above the riverbank. A fisherman smiling as he pushed his small wooden boat away from the shore. A pair of white birds flying low above the reeds. These were ordinary sights. Yet they became treasured memories, woven gently into everyday childhood. Back at home, another set of chores was waiting. One girl carefully sorted grain, removing tiny stones before it could be ground into flour. Her younger brother gathered dry reeds for the cooking fire. Their grandmother repaired a worn basket that had served the family for many seasons. Nothing useful was ever thrown away if it could still be repaired. Children learned this lesson early. Carefulness meant survival. As the morning grew warmer, many children followed their parents to work. Some entered workshops filled with the smell of fresh wood and smooth stone. Others walked into fields where rows of barley stretched toward the brightening sky. A young boy helped his father inspect a simple irrigation channel leading from the river. Tiny cracks had formed along one edge. Together they packed damp mud into the openings, smoothing it carefully with their hands. The work seemed small. Yet without these channels, precious water could escape before reaching the crops. Every repair mattered. Nearby, another child gathered fallen dates beneath a tall palm tree. She looked carefully at each fruit before placing it into her basket. Some were perfectly ripe. Others were too soft. Her mother showed her how to tell the difference with only a gentle touch. It was another quiet lesson. One more piece of knowledge passed from one generation to the next. By midday, the familiar heat spread across the valley. Children slowed their pace. They rested briefly beneath patches of shade whenever possible. Cool water from shaded clay jars refreshed tired faces and dusty hands. Even the animals moved more slowly beneath the powerful sun. No one argued with the heat. It had always been part of life beside the Nile. As the afternoon gently unfolded, the village settled into its peaceful rhythm once again. Work continued without hurry. Voices remained soft. Tools moved steadily from hand to hand. The smell of warm bread drifted once more through the narrow streets, reminding everyone that evening was slowly drawing near. The shadows lengthened. The air became kinder. A cool breeze returned from the river, carrying the scent of fresh water and green reeds across the fields. Children finished their final tasks before walking home beside their families. Dust covered their sandals. Their hands showed traces of clay, grain, or woven flax. Their shoulders felt pleasantly tired after another useful day. When darkness finally settled across the Nile Valley, the stars returned one by one above the quiet land. Families gathered inside their homes. Simple meals were shared. Gentle stories were told. Children closed their eyes, listening to the endless whisper of the river beyond the village, knowing that with tomorrow's sunrise, the same peaceful rhythm would begin once again. The gentle whisper of the Nile continued through the night, never asking for attention, yet always present. Its waters slipped quietly between green riverbanks and fields that had fed families for countless generations. Under the soft light of the moon, the surface of the river seemed almost perfectly still. Only an occasional fish disturbed the water, leaving circles that slowly widened before disappearing into the darkness. The village rested peacefully nearby. The day's voices had faded long ago. The workshops were silent. The marketplace stood empty. Even the animals seemed content beneath the cool night sky. Children slept soundly beside their families inside small mud brick homes. The thick walls held back much of the heat collected during the afternoon, making the rooms comfortable as the night breeze wandered gently through open doorways. A grandmother quietly adjusted a folded linen cloth over her youngest grandchild before settling back onto her own woven mat. She had performed this small act of kindness many times. It needed no words. Love often appeared through quiet gestures. Outside, the stars slowly crossed the heavens. For the people of ancient Egypt, the night sky was a familiar companion. Without bright lamps or crowded cities, every star shone clearly above the valley. Children sometimes wondered about those distant lights, listening as older relatives pointed toward familiar patterns while sharing stories remembered from long ago. Those stories were gentle. They were not told to frighten children. They were told to help them feel connected to the world around them. Little by little, the eastern sky began to brighten. Morning returned with its patient rhythm. A cool breeze drifted over the Nile before reaching the village. Birds hidden among the papyrus reeds greeted the sunrise with quiet songs. Soon the first cooking fires were lit. Thin streams of smoke rose into the clear air. Inside one humble home, a young girl opened her eyes. For a moment she remained still, listening. She heard the soft crackling of the fire. She heard her father stepping outside. She heard her mother's hands gently shaping fresh dough. Everything sounded exactly as it had the day before. That familiar rhythm brought comfort. She stood, folded her sleeping cloth, and carefully rolled the woven mat she had shared with her younger sister. The younger child was only beginning to wake. She rubbed her eyes and smiled sleepily before following her sister outside. The morning air felt wonderfully cool. Their bare feet touched the packed earth as they walked toward the small courtyard. Nearby, a rooster welcomed the sunrise. A donkey patiently waited beside a wooden cart. Goats wandered slowly through the narrow lane, watched carefully by an older boy carrying a simple walking stick. The sisters collected empty clay jars. Their mother smiled softly as they prepared for another walk to the river. The path toward the Nile had become as familiar as the doorway of their own home. Every stone, every bend, every cluster of reeds. They had walked it hundreds of times. Along the way, they greeted neighbors making the same journey. An elderly man carried two large jars balanced across a wooden pole. A young mother held the hand of her small son while balancing a basket upon her shoulder. Several boys laughed quietly after spotting a group of white birds lifting gracefully into the morning sky. No one hurried. The day had only just begun. When they reached the riverbank, the water reflected the golden colors of dawn. The Nile looked peaceful beyond words. Small wooden boats rested quietly against the shore. Fishermen prepared their nets with slow, practiced movements. Some children paused to watch. One fisherman carefully untangled a section of woven rope. His hands moved with remarkable patience. Every knot mattered. Every repair meant another day of fishing could continue without trouble. The children watched closely. Even without speaking, they were learning. Nearby, the sisters filled their clay jars. The cool water splashed gently against the smooth sides of the containers. Together they lifted them with careful hands. The journey home required balance more than strength. A careless step could spill valuable water. They walked steadily beneath the growing morning light. Back in the village, breakfast waited. Warm bread emerged from the clay oven. Its comforting smell drifted through the home. Simple bowls of beans rested beside fresh herbs gathered from a nearby garden. The family gathered together before beginning another day of work. There was no waste. Each loaf represented months of patient labor. Children understood this better with every passing year. After breakfast, the village became busier. Farmers disappeared toward the fields. Craftsmen opened their workshops. Merchants arranged baskets of vegetables beneath woven shades. Children followed the paths that had become part of their everyday lives. One boy spent the morning beside his uncle, who repaired farming tools. The wooden handles of hoes and sickles often became worn after many seasons. The uncle showed him how to smooth rough edges with careful strokes. The work demanded steady hands. Too much pressure could split the wood. Too little accomplished nothing. The boy watched closely before trying himself. His first attempt was uneven. His uncle simply nodded and handed him another piece. Learning required patience. Across the village, a girl helped her grandmother prepare flax fibers for spinning. The soft strands rested in neat bundles. Together they separated them gently before twisting them into thread. The grandmother spoke quietly as they worked. She remembered doing the very same task beside her own grandmother many years earlier. The child smiled. She liked imagining that hands from generations long before had made these same gentle movements. By late morning, the heat slowly returned. The bright Egyptian sun climbed high above the valley. Dust warmed beneath every sandal. Even the breeze seemed softer now. Children helping in the fields paused beneath the shade of date palms. Some drank cool water from clay cups. Others simply rested for a few quiet moments before returning to work. The afternoon unfolded at its own peaceful pace. A young boy gathered reeds along the edge of the river. Another carried vegetables from a nearby garden. Two sisters carefully folded newly woven linen before placing it inside a wooden chest. Every task felt ordinary. Yet together they supported the entire household. Responsibility arrived gently. One season at a time. As evening approached, the golden light spread across the fields. Long shadows stretched toward the river. Fishermen guided their boats home. Oxen returned slowly from the farmland. Children walked beside their parents, carrying empty baskets or simple tools used throughout the day. The village welcomed them with familiar smells. Fresh bread baked once again. Vegetables simmered quietly over cooking fires. Neighbors exchanged gentle greetings before disappearing into their homes. Inside, families gathered close together. The work of the day had ended. Children listened while grandparents shared quiet memories of earlier harvests and peaceful floods that had nourished the land. Outside, the first stars appeared above the Nile. The warm desert breeze drifted softly through the open doorway. One by one, tired eyes closed. The quiet breathing of sleeping families blended with the distant whisper of flowing water. And as another peaceful night settled over ancient Egypt, the timeless rhythm of the river carried one more ordinary day gently into history. The night air over the Nile was The Nile welcomed another quiet night with the same gentle patience it had shown for thousands of years. Its calm waters reflected the moon like polished silver, broken only by the slow ripple of a passing fish or the quiet movement of a wooden boat tied securely along the shore. Tall papyrus reeds leaned softly in the warm breeze, brushing together with the whisper that drifted across the sleeping valley. The village had grown still. The ovens had cooled after baking the evening's bread. The workshops stood empty, their tools carefully put away until morning. Even the donkeys, after carrying heavy loads through dusty streets, rested peacefully beside simple shelters made from reeds and mud brick. Inside one small home, a family slept close together. The room was plain, yet it felt warm with the comfort of familiar voices and shared routines. A clay lamp had burned low before finally going dark. Woven baskets rested neatly beside the doorway. A grinding stone, polished smooth by many years of use, waited quietly in the corner. The oldest daughter woke for only a moment. She listened to the peaceful sounds surrounding her. The slow breathing of her younger brothers. The gentle sigh of the breeze outside. The distant murmur of the Nile. Everything felt calm. Within moments, she drifted back into sleep. Soon, the darkness began to soften. Far beyond the eastern horizon, the first pale light slowly appeared. The stars faded one by one. Morning returned as gently as flowing water. Before long, birds hidden among the date palms welcomed the sunrise with quiet songs. A rooster called from somewhere near the edge of the village. Thin streams of smoke began rising from the first cooking fires. The familiar rhythm of another day quietly began. The children woke naturally. Years of following the same daily routine had taught their bodies when it was time to rise. There was no loud noise. No sudden rush. Only the quiet understanding that another day's work was waiting. The eldest boy carefully rolled his sleeping mat. His younger brother folded a light linen covering and placed it inside a wooden chest. Their mother smiled with quiet approval before kneeling beside the clay oven. She added dry reeds to the fire. Tiny flames danced beneath the baking bread. Soon the comforting smell filled the little home. Breakfast was simple, as it almost always was. Fresh bread. A handful of beans. A few onions. Cool water from the clay jar resting in the shade. The children ate slowly. No one wasted food. Even the smallest crumb had value. Every loaf represented months of careful work in the fields, from planting to harvest, from grinding grain to baking over the fire. As the meal ended, everyone prepared to leave. Outside, the village had fully awakened. Neighbors greeted one another with gentle smiles. A potter swept yesterday's dust from the entrance of his workshop. A fisherman carried his rolled net across one shoulder as he made his way toward the river. Merchants arranged woven baskets filled with vegetables beneath simple awnings that would soon provide welcome shade. Children followed their parents through the narrow streets. Some carried empty jars toward the Nile. Others balanced small baskets filled with tools. The youngest walked close beside older brothers and sisters, their smaller steps matching the slow pace of the family. The morning air remained pleasantly cool. It was a gift that would not last for many hours. Along the riverbank, life quietly unfolded. The Nile shimmered beneath the rising sun. Boats drifted gently against their moorings. Fishermen checked their nets carefully before setting out. One young boy watched his grandfather repair a frayed rope. The old man's hands moved slowly, almost without thought. Years of experience guided every motion. The boy studied each knot. His grandfather noticed. Without speaking, he handed the rope to the child. The boy tried to copy the movements. His fingers hesitated. The knot slipped loose. The old man simply smiled. He untied the rope and demonstrated again. No one expected perfection. Only patience. Nearby, several girls filled clay jars with fresh water. The jars grew heavy almost immediately. Together they lifted them with practiced care. The journey home demanded steady balance. Each careful step protected something precious. Back in the village, the work of the day spread naturally through every home. One family prepared flax for weaving. Another repaired damaged baskets. Elsewhere, children gathered dry reeds for the evening fire. Nothing felt unusual. These quiet responsibilities had become part of growing up. Children learned not only how to work but also how to notice. They noticed when the clay jar needed replacing. They noticed when the oven required fresh mud to seal a small crack. They noticed when a younger sibling looked tired after carrying water. Awareness itself became a valuable skill. A thoughtful child often made life easier for everyone. As the sun climbed higher, the fields beyond the village glowed beneath bright golden light. Farmers worked patiently among rows of grain. Older children helped guide oxen pulling simple wooden plows. The animals moved slowly, their steady pace matching the rhythm of the people beside them. No one urged them forward with great speed. The work would be finished in its own time. Nearby, a little girl gathered loose stalks left behind after harvesting. Her basket slowly filled. Every stalk mattered. Nothing useful was left behind if it could still feed the family or the animals. The warmth of the day gradually increased. By midday, the familiar Egyptian heat settled gently across the valley. Children instinctively slowed their pace. They sought the shade of date palms or the cool shelter of thick mud brick walls whenever possible. Clay cups of cool water passed quietly from hand to hand. No one drank carelessly. Every journey to the river required effort. Water deserved respect. Inside one workshop, the steady tapping of a carpenter echoed softly through the room. A young apprentice watched as his father shaped a smooth wooden handle for a farming tool. The smell of fresh wood filled the air. Tiny curls of shavings gathered on the floor. The child swept them into a basket without being asked. Small acts of responsibility had become habits. As afternoon slowly turned toward evening, the light softened across the land. The harsh brightness gave way to warm golden colors. The breeze returned from the Nile carrying the pleasant scent of fresh water and green reeds. Children walking home felt the tiredness in their legs, yet there was comfort in that feeling. It reminded them that the day's work had been honest. That they had helped. That they belonged. Cooking fires came alive once more. The smell of baking bread drifted gently through the village. Families gathered together inside their homes. Parents listened quietly as children spoke about the small moments that had filled the day. A bird's nest discovered near the fields. A young goat that had wandered into the marketplace. A fisherman who had returned with an especially large catch. Simple stories. Ordinary stories. The kind that stayed in memory long after grand events had been forgotten. Outside, darkness slowly wrapped itself around the Nile Valley. The stars returned, bright and countless above the ancient land. The river continued its endless journey beneath their gentle light. Inside the little mud brick homes, children settled once more upon their woven mats. Their tired hands rested quietly beside them. The warm desert breeze drifted softly through the open doorway. And another peaceful day, filled with quiet work, gentle family moments, and the steady rhythm of the Nile, slipped silently into history. The night has become very still. The last cooking fires have faded into quiet embers, glowing softly outside the mud brick homes before disappearing into darkness. The narrow village paths that were filled with footsteps only hours ago now rest beneath the gentle light of the moon. The marketplace is silent. The workshops have closed their wooden doors. The fields, so busy beneath the warm sun, now wait peacefully for another dawn. The Nile continues to flow. It does not hurry. It does not stop. Its quiet waters carry the reflection of countless stars, just as they have for thousands of years. Along the riverbank, the papyrus reeds bend gently in the warm desert breeze, whispering to one another in voices too soft to understand. Inside the humble homes, families have settled down for the night. Parents rest after another long day of labor. Grandparents breathe slowly, their faces calm in the fading light. Children sleep peacefully upon woven reed mats, their small hands finally still after carrying water, gathering reeds, helping in the fields, watching younger brothers and sisters, and learning the quiet rhythms that shaped everyday life beside the Nile. There were no grand celebrations waiting for them tomorrow. No great rewards. Only another sunrise. Another loaf of bread to bake. Another walk to the river. Another basket to carry. Another field to tend beneath the bright Egyptian sun. Yet within those ordinary days lived something lasting. Kindness shared without expecting praise. Wisdom passed gently from older hands to younger ones. Neighbors helping neighbors during difficult seasons. Parents giving the best portion of a simple meal to a growing child. A grandfather patiently showing how to tie a fishing net. A grandmother quietly repairing a basket that would serve the family for another year. These moments were rarely written on temple walls. No royal scribe carefully carved them into stone. No monument remembers the names of the children who walked these dusty roads, who laughed beside the river, who learned to grind grain, shape clay, weave linen, or guide small boats across calm water. History often remembers kings. But every kingdom rested upon ordinary families. It was their quiet work that baked the bread. Their careful hands that raised the homes. Their patient labor that planted the fields. Their children who slowly grew into the next generation, carrying forward the same gentle routines that had been taught with love and patience. And so, as the centuries drifted by, the footsteps of those children slowly disappeared beneath new layers of earth. The mud brick walls returned to dust. The wooden tools wore away. The woven baskets finally unraveled. Only the Nile remained. It continued to flow through the valley, carrying the memory of countless ordinary lives whose stories became part of the river itself. Tonight, we have walked beside them. We have followed the quiet paths they knew so well. We have listened to the sound of sandals upon dusty ground, to the gentle splash of water against the shore, to the crackle of cooking fires, the steady rhythm of grinding grain, and the soft evening voices of families gathering after another day beneath the Egyptian sky. Now, the village has fallen completely silent. The moon climbs a little higher. The stars shine a little brighter. A cool breeze drifts gently across the water before passing through the sleeping reeds. The Nile continues its endless journey into the darkness. There is nothing more to carry. Nothing more to mend. Nothing more to prepare before dawn. Only the peaceful sound of flowing water. Only the quiet warmth of the night. Only the ancient river, moving steadily beneath a sky filled with stars. May its calm current carry every busy thought gently away. May the warm desert breeze soften the edges of the day. May the silence of the ancient world wrap around you like a light linen blanket beneath the endless Egyptian sky. And as the river flows on through the quiet night, may your eyes grow heavy, your breathing slow, and your dreams drift as peacefully as the timeless waters of the Nile.